Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala syarafil anbiya al-mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, in the previous video I have explained to you the nature of fitrah, free will, symbolic language, inner speech, and how the internal and external influences affect our perception, and then how we are going to use later on our spiritual, emotional and mental physical integration technique, the Pi-CBT technique, to develop a positive behavior and a positive outcome in life. So in the previous video I have explained to you the nature of the psycho-spiritual basis for Islamic psychology. As I mentioned to you, our metaphysical foundation of Islam is based on we are a spiritual being living in a physical world, temporary. So we are a wayfarer on this earth, that we live and utilize our spiritual, emotional, mental self to then work towards enhancing the goodness of our existence, the perfection of our existence on this life, to become finally an insanul kamil, a perfected being. So we are given the tools and the faculties to achieve all that. So what is important is for us to understand that the fitrah, the good that Allah gives us, and our nature at azali, when we existed in the realm of the first covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the realm before the existence of the universe, the realm of azali, we have three levels. That is our qalb, alright, our akal and our roh. At the level of azali, the dominant characteristic is the roh, the qalb and the akal. It is always interchangeable. Always remember the nature of the soul. If you read books in Islam which talk about the soul, you must understand that the soul comprises of the roh, or this way, the qalb or the nafs. They are all integrated as one entity. They are functionally different, but they are the one and the same thing from the perspective of the great Imam of Islam, especially Imam Ghazali. He explained it in detail. So this model that I'm giving you is my interpretation of the Ghazalian model, Al-Ghazali's model. So if you may infer for some other people, they may have a different, slightly different model. Alhamdulillah, we are not saying that this is the only model. So this is the Ghazalian model, where in our physical world, we live on this earth, the dominant role is the qalb, alright, the roh and the akal within it, and the jasad, the physical self, and our nafs is here. So here our nafs is all spiritual, purely spiritual. That means whether it's the roh that is in azali, as we say, the dominant functional role of this entity called the soul or the self or the nafs is roh, qalb and akal, and they are all in the realm beyond space, beyond time, in the realm of the spiritual. So we are a spiritual being of that nature, in closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As we live on this earth, we have this infusion of our jasad. So this all entity, we live within the physical realm and we live within the spiritual realm. So we are a temporal spiritual. We are living in a temporary world, temporal spiritual being living on this earth. So what is important is how are we going to understand the use of symbolic language, the use of inner speech, so that we can have an integrated SEMP self, talking inwardly to ourselves. So when we have a therapeutic approach or a model in which we are going to explain our nature, we have this input. So the input from the jasad, the input from the roh, the input from the qalb, and the input from the akal. We are breaking this into four components. But remember, these three components, they are one and the same thing, depending on the emphasis or depending on the functional role as we did life. For example, the akal. We are talking about the akal. The functional role is the infusion of knowledge. The qalb is the dominant role. There is the heart, that is used to direct us in terms of our life. So this is very much explained in the Quran. The Ruh is what was infused to us when we begin our existence. So all these faculties within the spiritual realm and within the physical realm will affect us. So Islamic psychology would not be like a CBT, because CBT will only talk about what? They'll talk about, for example, if you are a person, all right, you are having a problem. What is the CBT model? Which I will go into very much detail, but within CBT, say for example, this is a person. We have a person here, all right? All right, we have a person here, and this is his brain, all right? And this is his body, all right? So this guy, what is interacting for him in the CBT model is that it's just the brain and the physical world. That means it's a neurological, physical interaction. Remember again, neurological, that means the brain and the interface with the body. That means through the neurotransmitters, the chemical reaction, and through the electrical activity, all right, of the synapses, all right, and other function in terms of the, for example, the pressure waves of our heart, and so on. This model talks about only this aspect, all right, but it doesn't talk about this aspect. So it only talks about the physical body, because the basis of CBT is secular materialism. Remember, they are just secular idea. Then the idea that this jello, this 3-pound jello, this brain, that is in our head, is the commander of our existence on this earth. There's nothing more to it. So if you have an emotion, where does the emotion come from? Your brain. If you have a suffering, where does suffering relate to? The brain. If you have love, where does love come from? The brain. Because they have no external influencer. Insofar as you are concerned, the external influencer in terms of the secular model is the environment, the physical environment, your genetics, and your interpersonal environment. But they do not have the nature of inner speech in the perspective of the spiritual, emotional, and in terms of the qalb, the ruh, and the akal inner speech. They have this inner speech in terms of the jasad. That means the inner speech or automatic thoughts is coming from where? In CBT, the automatic thoughts is coming from here. Your AT, automatic thoughts, in CBT is coming from the brain, and nothing more than the brain. So this is the materialistic model of existence, and this is the basis of the foundation in which most therapy, CBT and its related therapy, is based on this. But mindfulness will be moving slightly further, because mindfulness is talking about the akal, the mind. So the CBT model is purely secular. The MBCT, the DBT model, they take one step nearer. That means they have this jasad, they have the mind, the akal, and the interface between the mind and the akal and the jasad, or the mind and the body, is what they call mindfulness. So if you talk about mindfulness, their worldview is slightly different. That means they are taking this aspect, but they call it a neutral aspect. They don't call it a spirit. They just call it the mind, what the mind consists of. They have many definitions. That means if they take it from the Buddhist perspective, it is a Buddhist perspective idea of the mind. If they take it from the Hindu perspective, it is a Hindu perspective. Or if they take it from the Jewish or the Christian perspective, the mindfulness is based on the religious idea. So when we talk about MBCT, usually they take it from the Buddhist idea. All right, you have the mind that interact with your body, and your brain is here. All right, so you have the mind, you have the brain, you have your physical body. The interaction of your mind, your brain, and the physical body will then give the various input. That means your ABC, the activating event, all right, the behavior and the consequences. This is all built into this 3 level: the mind, That means the mind will be the, what they call it, the force or the vital force that is acting, impinging on the brain. All right. So, for example, as MBCT, they're talking about this external thing. So, if I draw here this external thing is beyond space, beyond time. This is called the mind. So, they call that the mind. All right. So, they're getting closer to our Islamic framework. So, when we talk about inner speech in terms of the mindfulness-based psychotherapy, that is MBCT, they are talking about the input from the realm of the mind. What is it? They does not explain, but it is a form of energy, a form of input from the universe. So they call it the universal, the input from some of that, they use the term universal mind. All right? Or the input from the universe, because we are part of the universe. So, as you can see, they are using symbolic language again. Again, the symbolic language, how does this mindfulness operate? Again, it is the use of symbolic language. And from then, you have this idea of the mind interacting with the brain and giving you arisals, the automatic thoughts, whether positive or negative. And from then, you can actually then develop a protocol or a model. All right? Insofar as MBCT, they have their model. For Islam, we have our model, because we are not talking about just the mind, we are talking about the qalb and the ruh. So when we are in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained upon us that the dominant role, the force vitae that we have within us is the qalb. Over and over in the Quran and the Sunnah, in the hadith of the Prophet, we are talking about the heart. So the heart would play the dominant role together with the akal, together with the ruh. But remember, these three things are one and the same thing, but functionally differentiated. That's all. So if you want to talk and you say this is the ruh or the nafs, it's okay. If you want to say that plus this is the nafs, that is better, because then we are talking about the integrated self of the ruh, the S, E, the emotion, the qalb, M, the mind, and P, the jasad. S-E-M-P. All right? And when we integrate all of this input in a unified therapeutic protocol or approach, we call it, what do we call for all these things? We call it SEMP integration. That is the technique that I want to discuss over and over again, because when we tackle a psychological problem, depression or anxiety or OCD or whatever it is, we are looking at the parallel input of how to change the negative automatic thoughts from the brain to our neurological system, to our mind, to our qalb and ruh, and how they are used in such a functional approach that we can resolve most of the psychological problems that humanity faces in the 21st century, inshallah. So what I want you to understand is that I'm repeating, because you can go back to our previous video, psycho-spiritual basis for Islamic psychology. This is a continuum to the previous video that I'm talking about the day before that, that when we talk about the nature of fitrah, the nature of symbolic language, the nature of automatic thoughts or inner speech, free will, they're all interconnected in one wholesome, beautiful basis for the psychology of being, the psychology of being a human being that will excel in this world and excel in the hereafter, given purpose and meaning for our existence on this earth as the Caliph of Allah. Remember, always you go back, when you talk about positive Islamic psychology, one of the principal idea is we are the Caliph of Allah on this earth, always trying to make ourselves perfect, striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be perfect, helping others to be good, and making the world good and perfect, so that we fulfill our existence on this journey towards akhirah, which will be our permanent home. So inshallah, when I bring on the other model in terms of the CBT model, as I explained to you in the subsequent video, you'll understand how we come about with this. So for those of you taking the Pi-CBT Certified Coach program, please understand this idea and go back to the various video and study this a few times until you understand what is our framework, where our framework come from the Quran and the Sunnah, and how this model is being developed by Al-Ghazali. This is my interpretation, as I say, based on his writings and other scholars. From then, inshallah, we can then proceed to develop many tools and techniques within Pi-CBT, Positive Islamic Cognitive Behavior Therapy, and also the framework for Islamic psychology, which we can present to the Muslim world and to the psychology world at large, and to be utilized by the Muslims and inshallah, and maybe by the non-Muslims, as they find this to be the most perfect form of understanding the nature of existence. The whole existential question of existence is answered within the framework of Islamic psychology, and all this is beautifully binded by the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the Quran, and the way the beloved of Allah, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his king for his sahabas, the tabi'in, and all the imams, the great scholars that brought this understanding of the depth of this beautiful deen for us to practice in the 21st century, and to be achievers and good people that will lead the world towards goodness, blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our journey towards the goodness of this world and the goodness of hereafter, inshallah.